My beloved child. Someone spoke your name last night in a place you could not see. It was not a crowded room filled with strangers. It was a quiet moment, wrapped in hesitation, where hearts revealed more than lips intended to say. A truth about you was spoken, not loudly, not with anger, but with a sincerity that carried more weight than anyone in that room expected. The one who heard it did not answer immediately. Instead, silence settled over the conversation. That silence was not empty. It was filled with memories, questions, and emotions that had been carefully hidden for far too long. While you rested, believing the night would pass like any other, something began shifting beyond your awareness. A thought that had been resisted for so long could no longer be ignored. A heart that had convinced itself to remain guarded suddenly found its defenses weakening. You have wondered why certain doors remained closed. You have questioned whether your prayers disappeared into the quiet. You have carried disappointments without letting the world see how deeply they affected you. Yet every silent tear, every lonely evening, every whispered prayer has been witnessed. None of it has been forgotten. Sometimes the greatest answers begin with a conversation you never hear. Last night became one of those moments. The truth that was spoken was not dramatic. It was simple. But simple truths often possess the greatest power. Someone described your kindness. Not the kindness you display for recognition. The quiet kindness. The kind that expects nothing in return. The sacrifices you made without announcing them. The forgiveness you offered when no apology ever arrived. The strength you carried while pretending everything was fine. As those words filled the room, the person listening realized they had misunderstood more than they had ever admitted. Their heart became unexpectedly restless. Memories they had carefully placed behind locked doors began returning one after another. A familiar smile. A conversation they thought they had forgotten. A moment when they almost reached out, but fear persuaded them to remain silent. Those memories no longer felt distant. They felt painfully alive. Yet that was not the moment that changed everything. Because another question quietly entered the conversation. If everything we believed was incomplete, what else have we failed to see? No one answered immediately. Sometimes the most life-changing questions require silence before they receive understanding. If you have ever felt overlooked. If you have wondered whether anyone truly recognized the depth of your heart. This message is here to remind you that your worth has never depended on someone's temporary misunderstanding. Truth has a remarkable way of finding the people who need it most. Even if it arrives later than expected. And perhaps you have noticed something changing within yourself recently. A strange peace where anxiety once lived. A quiet hope you cannot explain. An inner feeling that something unfinished is beginning to move again. That is not something to fear. Healing often arrives before visible change. Your spirit senses what your eyes cannot yet confirm. Meanwhile, the one who heard those words last night found sleep difficult. Not because of regret alone. But because a realization had begun growing stronger with every passing hour. The story they had been telling themselves about you no longer matched the person they were beginning to remember. Every assumption started losing its certainty. Every old conclusion became harder to defend. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, a single sentence echoed again and again inside their heart. It refused to leave. It challenged every decision they had made. It awakened a question they had avoided for far too long. But that question led them towards something even more unexpected. Because hidden within the truth they had just learned, was one detail that no one in that room realized would change everything. And when that forgotten detail finally surfaced, even the person who revealed your secret became completely silent. The room remained still. No one rushed to fill the silence, because some moments are too meaningful to interrupt. The words that had already been spoken lingered in the air, settling into every heart that had heard them. Yet beneath that quiet, another truth was waiting, one that had never been intended to come into the light. The person who had shared your secret lowered their eyes. For a brief moment, they seemed unsure whether they had said too much. What began as a simple conversation had uncovered emotions that no one expected to face. Across the room, the one who listened could no longer pretend they felt nothing. They remembered the times they had convinced themselves to move on. They remembered the excuses they created whenever your name quietly returned to their thoughts. They had believed that time would erase every unanswered feeling. Instead, time had only hidden them. Now those feelings were rising again, gentle but undeniable. There is a reason I am allowing you to hear this today. Many people believe that healing comes only after every question is answered. But often, healing begins the moment someone finally sees the truth they were too distracted to notice before. You have spent seasons wondering if your kindness mattered. You have questioned whether your patience had any purpose. You have silently carried burdens that few people ever recognized. Yet nothing offered with a sincere heart is ever wasted. Every act of grace leaves a mark, even when you never witness it. Last night proved that. The conversation slowly continued. Someone asked a quiet question. Why did we never see this before? Again, no one answered immediately. Because deep inside, they already knew. Assumptions had spoken louder than understanding. Distance had spoken louder than compassion. Fear had spoken louder than honesty. And now those voices were losing their power. The one who had been listening began seeing your story differently. Not through old misunderstandings. Not through rumors. But through the quiet evidence of the person you have always been. That realization brought both comfort and sorrow. Comfort, because your character was becoming clear. Sorrow, because they recognized how much precious time had been shaped by incomplete understanding. If this sounds familiar. If you have ever felt unseen despite giving your best. Do not believe that your story ends where someone else's misunderstanding begins. Grace has a way of rewriting conclusions that people once believed were permanent. But that was not the greatest surprise of the night. As the conversation seemed ready to end, someone reached for something that had been quietly resting nearby. It was ordinary. Small. Almost forgotten. Yet the moment it appeared, every expression in the room changed. No one expected that simple reminder to awaken so many emotions. One glance was enough. A memory returned with startling clarity. A promise that had never truly been broken. A feeling that had never completely disappeared. Suddenly, the conversation was no longer about your secret. It had become about what that secret revealed. Not weakness. Not failure. But the depth of your heart. The willingness to love with patience instead of pride. The quiet courage to remain kind after disappointment. The strength to keep believing even when answers seemed delayed. Those qualities could no longer be ignored. Yet what happened next was never meant to be revealed. Because someone in that room finally spoke the words they had been holding back for far too long. The moment those words left their lips, every person present looked at one another in complete silence. No one argued. No one laughed. No one questioned what had just been said. Because, for the very first time, they all realized they had been preparing for a decision they never thought they would have to make. And before anyone could respond, one unexpected name was quietly mentioned. The moment that name was spoken, the atmosphere changed in a way no one could explain. It was not spoken with excitement. Nor was it spoken with regret. It was spoken carefully, almost as though everyone understood that a single name had the power to redirect the entire conversation. For several long moments, no one replied. Instead, they exchanged thoughtful glances, each person realizing they had reached a place where old assumptions could no longer survive. The one who had listened so quietly throughout the evening finally leaned forward. Their voice was calm, but something within it had changed. What if we have been looking at this story from the wrong side all along? No one challenged the question. Because deep inside, each heart had already begun asking the same thing. Sometimes the greatest transformation does not happen when new facts are discovered. It happens when familiar facts are finally understood with new eyes. That is what began unfolding last night. As the conversation continued, someone recalled a moment from long ago. It seemed ordinary at the time. A brief meeting. A quiet smile. A simple act of generosity. Nothing dramatic. Yet now, viewed through the truth that had just been revealed, that memory carried an entirely different meaning. Suddenly, little moments that once seemed insignificant began fitting together like pieces of a beautiful picture. The patience you showed. The grace you extended. The times you chose peace instead of proving yourself right. None of those moments had disappeared. They had simply been waiting for the right heart to recognize their value. If you have ever wondered whether your quiet goodness matters, hear this with confidence. Character leaves echoes that travel farther than words ever can. People may forget conversations. They may misunderstand circumstances. But genuine kindness has a way of returning when the time is right. Even now, something within you has been preparing for this season. You may not have noticed it. Perhaps you have found yourself letting go of old disappointments more easily. Perhaps certain memories no longer carry the same weight they once did. Perhaps your heart has become softer instead of harder after everything you have endured. That is not weakness. That is healing. And healing often prepares the path for blessings that wounded hearts could never receive. Meanwhile, the conversation took another unexpected turn. One person quietly admitted something they had never shared before. I always thought there was more to the story. The room grew silent again. Another voice answered. I felt the same, but I ignored it. Those simple confessions changed everything. Because they revealed that doubt had existed long before your secret was ever spoken. People had sensed that something about the story never quite fit. They simply lacked the courage to question it. Last night gave them that courage. One by one, walls that had stood for so long began to fall. Not through arguments. Not through pressure. But through honesty. There is a quiet strength in truth. It does not force itself into the room. It waits patiently until hearts are ready to receive it. And when that moment comes, even deeply held beliefs begin to soften. But that was not the moment that changed everything. As the evening drew closer to its end, someone noticed something no one else had paid attention to before. It was not a word. It was not an object. It was an expression. A single look that crossed the face of the one who had remained so quiet all night. In that brief expression, years of guarded emotions became impossible to hide. Hope. Regret. Gratitude. And one feeling they had been trying to bury for far too long. The others noticed it too. No one said a word. They didn't need to. Because they suddenly understood what was about to happen next. Before the night was over, a decision would be made. Not out of guilt. Not out of pressure. But because one quiet realization had finally become impossible to ignore. And just as that decision was about to be spoken aloud, a message arrived that no one had been expecting. The sound was soft, yet it drew every eye in the room. No one had expected another interruption. For a moment, the conversation stopped completely as the message was read in silence. The person holding it did not react immediately. Instead, they read it once, then a second time, as though searching for meaning hidden between the words. Everyone waited. The stillness became almost sacred. Finally, they looked up. There is something we need to understand before we go any further. Those words settled gently over the room. No one spoke. Some truths ask us to listen before they ask us to respond. The message itself was not dramatic. It contained no accusation. No demand. No attempt to convince anyone of anything. Yet its quiet honesty carried a weight that no argument ever could. It reminded everyone present that the strongest hearts are not the loudest. They are the ones that continue choosing grace after disappointment. The ones that refuse to let bitterness become their identity. The ones that keep believing there is goodness left, even after seasons of waiting. Without realizing it, they were describing you. Not the version created by assumptions. Not the version shaped by incomplete stories. But the person you have quietly become through every challenge you have faced. You did not become stronger because life was easy. You became stronger because you kept choosing hope when discouragement would have been easier. Perhaps you have wondered why your journey has taken longer than you expected. Why certain prayers seem to remain unanswered. Why some relationships required more patience than you thought possible. The answer is not found in punishment. It is found in preparation. There are blessings that can only be received by a heart that has learned compassion. There are moments of joy that mean more because they arrive after seasons of quiet faith. Nothing you have endured with grace has been without purpose. As these thoughts settled into the hearts of those gathered, something unexpected happened. The conversation no longer centered on your secret. Instead, it centered on your character. One person smiled gently and said, "Maybe we have spent too much time discussing what happened. And not enough time appreciating who this person truly is." No one disagreed. One after another, memories surfaced. A thoughtful gesture. A patient response. A time when you chose understanding instead of anger. Small moments. Almost forgotten. Yet together they painted a picture no rumor could erase. Sometimes people recognize the value of a life not because of one extraordinary event, but because countless ordinary acts quietly reveal an extraordinary heart. If this message resonates with you, hold on to this truth. You never needed to become someone else to be worthy of love, respect, or acceptance. Your greatest strength has always been your authenticity. And that authenticity has been reaching hearts in ways you could never measure. Yet what happened next was never meant to be revealed. Just as the room began to grow peaceful again, the oldest person present spoke for the first time. Until that moment, they had simply listened. Watching. Reflecting. Waiting. When they finally raised their eyes, everyone else instinctively became silent. Years of wisdom rested behind that gentle gaze. Their voice was quiet, but every word carried unmistakable clarity. "I think we have all overlooked one detail." The room grew still once more. "What detail?" someone whispered. The elder took a slow breath. It wasn't the secret that changed this night. Every face turned toward them. It was the way that truth revealed what has been hidden inside each of our hearts all along. No one moved. No one interrupted. Because deep within, they knew those words were true. And then, the elder began sharing a memory from years ago. A memory connected to you. One that almost no one else remembered. One that explained far more than anyone had ever imagined. Before the story could reach its most revealing moment, a quiet knock came at the door. The gentle knock echoed through the room. No one had been expecting a visitor at such a late hour. For a few quiet seconds, no one moved. It was as if everyone sensed that whatever stood beyond that door carried more than a simple arrival. The elder remained seated, their expression peaceful. "Go ahead," they said softly. "Some moments are delayed only until every heart is ready." The door slowly opened. The visitor stepped inside with quiet humility, almost apologizing for interrupting. They had not come to change the conversation. Or so they believed. After a few polite words, they noticed the unusual silence filling the room. "You all look as though something significant has happened." No one answered immediately. Because how could they explain what had unfolded? How could they describe that an ordinary evening had slowly become a journey through forgotten memories, hidden compassion, and truths that had waited patiently for their time? The visitor looked from one face to another before speaking again. "I hope I'm not too late." Those simple words settled deeply. Not too late. How many times have you whispered those very fears within your own heart? Have I waited too long? Have I missed what was meant for me? Has life quietly moved forward without me? If you have ever carried those questions, listen carefully. Grace is not measured by your timetable. Some of the most meaningful chapters begin long after people believe the story is finished. The seasons that feel delayed are often preparing something more complete than you could have imagined. As the visitor joined the gathering, they unknowingly added another piece to the story. They mentioned a conversation from several weeks earlier. At the time, it had seemed unimportant. Just a passing remark. Yet now, placed beside everything that had been revealed, it suddenly carried remarkable significance. The room grew thoughtful once again. Every new memory seemed to confirm the same quiet truth. Your life had been touching hearts even when you believed no one noticed. Your patience had been teaching lessons without your knowledge. Your perseverance had become an example without your permission. That is the quiet influence of a sincere spirit. It rarely announces itself. It simply continues doing what is right until others finally recognize its beauty. One voice gently broke the silence. "I think we judged circumstances before we understood the person." Another answered. "And perhaps we were too quick to believe what was easiest instead of what was true." No one defended the past. No one searched for someone to blame. Because wisdom had replaced pride. Sometimes healing begins the moment people stop protecting their opinions and start pursuing understanding. That is exactly what was happening now. If this sounds familiar. If you have spent years wishing someone would truly see your heart, do not lose hope. Recognition often arrives quietly. It does not always come with applause. Sometimes it begins with one honest conversation. Sometimes with one changed perspective. Sometimes with one heart willing to admit, "I was wrong." The elder smiled gently as these realizations unfolded. Then they said something almost no one expected. "What we have discovered tonight is only the beginning." Several faces lifted in surprise. The truth about this person was never the final lesson. It was the doorway. The room became completely still. The real question is no longer who they are. The elder paused. The real question is what we will choose to do now that we finally understand. No one answered. Because every person present knew a decision could no longer be postponed. The silence was no longer uncertain. It was intentional. Each heart was searching for courage. Then, just as someone gathered the strength to speak, the visitor quietly reached into a small envelope they had been carrying since they arrived. "I almost forgot," they said. "This was entrusted to me." Every eye fixed on the envelope. It had your name written across the front. And the moment the elder recognized the handwriting, their expression changed completely. The elder held the envelope with extraordinary care. For a long moment, they did not open it. Their fingertips rested lightly against the paper, as though they already understood that what it contained deserved more than hurried attention. The room waited. No one urged them to continue. Some truths unfold best when they are welcomed with patience. Finally, the elder looked around the room. "This handwriting," they whispered. "I have not seen it in many years." A quiet breath escaped from someone across the table. The visitor watched with growing curiosity. "I was only asked to deliver it," they said gently. "I never imagined it carried such meaning." The elder nodded. Sometimes the smallest act of obedience becomes part of a much larger story. Slowly, they opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded page. Nothing elaborate. No grand display. Just carefully written words from a heart that had carried them for a very long time. Before reading aloud, the elder closed their eyes for a moment. Almost as if offering a silent prayer that every person present would hear not only the words, but the truth within them. When they finally began reading, the room became completely still. The letter spoke of gratitude. It spoke of quiet admiration. It spoke of someone whose kindness had changed lives without ever asking for recognition. It described a person who remained faithful to compassion even when life offered reasons to become discouraged. Every sentence reflected the same quiet message. Some people leave footprints on the earth. Others leave peace within the hearts of those they meet. As those words filled the room, tears quietly gathered in more than one pair of eyes. Not because the letter was filled with sorrow, but because it revealed how deeply one life can influence others without ever realizing it. Perhaps you have believed your quiet faithfulness has gone unnoticed. Perhaps you have wondered if the gentle choices you make each day truly matter. Hear this with confidence. Every act of grace plants a seed. Some bloom quickly. Others wait for the perfect season. But none are forgotten. The elder lowered the letter for a moment. There is something remarkable here, they said. This letter was written long before any of tonight's conversations. The room stirred with quiet surprise. Long before misunderstandings. Long before assumptions. Long before your secret was ever spoken aloud. Someone had already seen your heart. Someone had already recognized the goodness that others were only now beginning to understand. That realization changed everything. Because it meant the truth about you had existed all along. It had simply been waiting for others to catch up. The one who had listened so quietly throughout the evening slowly bowed their head. I spent so much time searching for proof, they admitted. When all along, the evidence was in the way this person lived. No one replied. There was nothing left to argue. Only truth remained. If this message has found you during a season of waiting, let it remind you that your character speaks even when your voice is silent. Your patience tells a story. Your forgiveness tells a story. Your resilience tells a story. And those stories often reach places you may never see. But that was not the moment that would be remembered most. As the elder carefully folded the letter, something slipped quietly onto the table. A small photograph. Its edges had softened with age. For years, it had remained hidden inside the envelope, unnoticed. The elder picked it up slowly. Their eyes widened. Then they smiled with a mixture of surprise and gentle understanding. I never realized this was kept together, they whispered. Everyone leaned closer. The photograph revealed one forgotten moment. One shared memory. One quiet expression that explained why your name had never truly left a certain heart. And as the elder turned the photograph over, they discovered a handwritten sentence on the back. A sentence that had remained unseen for years. The moment they began reading those words aloud, everything everyone believed about your story was about to change. The elder's hands trembled ever so slightly as they turned the photograph over. No one in the room breathed a word. The quiet had become more than silence. It had become expectation. Every heart sensed that whatever had been written on the back of that faded photograph had survived the passing of years for a reason. The elder traced the delicate handwriting with a fingertip before finally speaking. It says. Their voice paused. Not because the words were difficult to read, but because they carried a tenderness that time had never erased. If life ever separates our paths, may truth bring them together again when both hearts are ready. The room fell completely still. No one had expected such a simple sentence to carry such extraordinary weight. It was not a promise made in haste. It was not a dramatic declaration. It was a quiet hope, written by someone who understood that love rooted in grace never demands its own timing. Instead, it waits with patience. The one who had listened so carefully throughout the evening closed their eyes. Those words awakened something they had tried to bury beneath years of responsibility, disappointment, and unanswered questions. For the first time, they stopped asking whether the past could be changed. Instead, they began asking a different question. What if this moment was never about returning to yesterday? What if it is about becoming ready for tomorrow? That single thought transformed the entire room. Until then, everyone had been looking backward. Searching old conversations. Replaying forgotten memories. Trying to understand what had gone wrong. Now they realized that truth was not inviting them to remain in the past. It was inviting them to step into a future shaped by wisdom instead of regret. My beloved child, there are seasons when life asks you to release what you cannot change so you can receive what has quietly been preparing for you. You may have carried disappointment. You may have wondered why certain chapters ended before you understood their purpose. Yet every closed chapter has been teaching your heart how to recognize peace when it finally arrives. Never believe that waiting has been empty. Waiting has been forming patience. Waiting has been deepening compassion. Waiting has been strengthening the quiet confidence that no circumstance can take away. If this message feels familiar, if your heart has known the ache of hoping while seeing little evidence, take comfort in this. The most meaningful answers often arrive after your spirit has become strong enough to receive them with gratitude instead of fear. The elder carefully placed the photograph beside the letter. These were never meant to be separated, they whispered. Neither object seemed remarkable on its own. Yet together they revealed a story no one had fully understood. One showed a cherished memory. The other revealed the hope that had quietly survived beyond that moment. The visitor looked around the room and softly asked, "Do you think this is why everything happened tonight?" The elder smiled. "I don't believe tonight created anything. I believe tonight uncovered what has been patiently waiting beneath the surface all along." Those words settled deeply into every heart. Sometimes truth does not arrive to create love. It arrives to remove the fear that has been hiding it. Sometimes healing does not change who people are. It reminds them of who they have always been. As the evening drew to a close, peace replaced uncertainty. Not because every question had been answered, but because everyone finally understood which question mattered most. It was no longer what secret was revealed. It had become, what kind of future will we choose now that we know the truth? Just as the gathering seemed ready to end, the visitor quietly remembered one final detail. "There is something else," they said. "The person who asked me to deliver this letter gave one final instruction." Every face turned toward them. "They told me not to hand it over until a certain sign appeared." The elder's expression became thoughtful. "What sign?" The visitor looked toward the window, where the first light of dawn had begun to fill the sky. Then they repeated the exact words they had been given. "When the morning arrives, and every heart in the room finally agrees, tell them where to find me." The room froze. Because for the first time that night, everyone realized they knew exactly who those words were pointing to. The first rays of morning stretched across the room, touching the old wooden table where the letter and photograph still rested. No one reached for them. It seemed almost wrong to disturb a moment that had unfolded with such quiet purpose. The visitor looked at the elder once more. "You recognize those words, don't you?" The elder nodded slowly. "I do." A gentle smile crossed their face. Not the smile of someone surprised, but of someone watching a promise complete its journey after many years. They always believed that truth should arrive before decisions. The room remained silent. Everyone understood now that this had never been about exposing a secret. It had been about revealing hearts. The conversation had uncovered something much greater than anyone expected. Not hidden mistakes. Not forgotten arguments. But the quiet goodness that had remained steady through every season. The elder carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside the envelope. Then they looked around the room. Do you know why this night feels different? No one answered. Because every person who entered this room carried a different version of the story. But no one is leaving with the same one. Those words settled deeply. How often does life change not because the facts are different, but because understanding finally catches up with truth? Perhaps that is where you are today. Perhaps you have spent too much time believing the version of yourself shaped by disappointment. The version that whispers you were forgotten. The version that questions whether your prayers made any difference. But heaven often works quietly within the ordinary. Not by forcing hearts. Not by demanding instant answers. But by patiently revealing what has always been real. Your kindness. Your resilience. Your willingness to forgive. Those gifts have never been invisible. They have simply been ripening in the hearts of those who were not yet ready to appreciate them. The visitor finally broke the silence. They also asked me to tell you something else. Every eye turned toward them. They said. The visitor paused, taking a slow breath. Do not rush what grace is already arranging. The elder closed their eyes for a moment. Then they smiled. That sounds exactly like them. The room filled with a peace no one had felt when the evening began. The urgency had faded. The confusion had softened. Hope had quietly taken its place. If this message has found you during a season when nothing seems to be moving, remember this moment. The greatest changes often begin long before they become visible. Roots grow beneath the surface before branches ever reach toward the sky. Your prayers have not been forgotten. Your patience has not been wasted. Your story has not been overlooked. Even now, there are conversations you cannot hear. Thoughts you cannot see. Hearts quietly changing in ways you could never arrange yourself. That is why you do not need to carry every burden alone. Trust the timing that is gently unfolding around you. Not because every outcome is certain, but because every season has the opportunity to shape wisdom, compassion, and peace within you. The elder stood from their chair and walked toward the window. The sun had fully risen. It is time, they said softly. No one asked where they were going. Somehow, they all knew. The destination mattered less than the decision that had already been made inside their hearts. Before leaving, the elder turned back toward the room one final time. There is one lesson I hope none of us forget. They looked at the photograph. Then at the letter. Then toward the open door. Never allow a single misunderstanding to speak louder than a lifetime of quiet character. No one responded. They didn't need to. Every heart had already accepted those words. And as they stepped outside into the morning light, far beyond the path they had expected to walk, someone was waiting. Not with explanations. Not with demands. Not with regret. But with one quiet question that would determine everything that happened next.